The snow fell in heavy sheets that Christmas Eve, blanketing the quiet neighborhood in a soft white glow. I remember gripping the steering wheel as my breath fogged up the windshield, my heart pounding against my chest with an ache I hadn't felt in years. Christmas used to be my favorite day of the year, before everything changed. Before I lost my son to a house that looked warm from the outside but was frozen within. That night, I wasn't supposed to be there. I had promised myself I'd stop driving past their house every holiday, stop torturing myself by imagining him surrounded by laughter and gifts that I could no longer give. But something inside me, a mother's instinct maybe, wouldn't let me sleep. The city lights blurred behind the fog as I took that familiar turn toward the old red brick house that used to be ours before divorce papers turned love into boundaries, and boundaries turned my little boy into a weekend visitor. As I parked on the side of the snowy street, I saw golden light spilling from the living room window. The house was alive with movement, shadows dancing, laughter echoing faintly through the glass. For a brief moment, I smiled, thinking, at least he's happy. But then, through that soft halo of light, I noticed something small and still near the front porch. At first, I thought it was one of the neighborhood cats curled up against the steps for warmth. But when I looked closer, my heart stopped. It was him, my son. My little boy sitting on the frozen porch, his knees pulled up to his chest, his thin jacket dusted with snow. He was trembling, his lips were pale, and in his hands he was clutching something, something that glimmered faintly under the Christmas lights. I jumped out of the car before I even realized what I was doing. The cold air sliced through my coat as I stumbled toward him, my boots crunching in the snow. "Liam?" My voice cracked. He didn't look up first. He just stared at the little toy car in his hand, the one I'd given him last Christmas, before everything went wrong. When he finally raised his head, his eyes met mine, and for a second, the world just stopped. There was confusion in his face, then relief, then a kind of fear I couldn't understand. I dropped to my knees and pulled him into my arms, feeling how cold his skin was against mine. His body was shivering so hard, it almost hurt to hold him. "Sweetheart, what are you doing out here?" I whispered. Before he could answer, a burst of laughter came from inside the house, loud, cheerful, cruelly oblivious. Through the frosted window, I could see them. My ex-husband, his new wife, and her parents gathered around the fireplace, their faces glowing in the warmth. The new wife, Sophie, was handing out gifts wrapped in gold paper, and everyone looked so perfectly happy it made me sick. My son had been right there, just a few feet away, freezing in the dark while they celebrated without him. He tried to speak, but his teeth were chattering too much. They said I had to stay outside for a bit, he mumbled. My chest tightened. "What? Why?" I asked, brushing the snow off his hair, but he looked away, silent. I could see the shame in his eyes, the kind a child should never have to feel. I wanted to burst through that door and scream, but all I could do was pull him closer and wrap my scarf around him. "You're coming with me," I whispered, "right now." I lifted him into my arms. He was lighter than I remembered, too light, and carried him toward the car. As I opened the door, I heard the front door of the house creak open. Sophie stood there, framed in warm light, wearing a red dress and holding a mug of cocoa. Her smile faded when she saw me. "Oh, it's you," she said flatly. Her tone carried that same polite cruelty she always used when pretending to be civil. "He just wanted some fresh air. We were going to call him in soon." I stared at her, my voice trembling with anger. "He's freezing, Sophie. He could have died out here." She shrugged, taking a sip from her mug. "You're exaggerating. He's fine. Maybe he just wanted to see you." Her eyes flicked toward my car as if she wanted me gone. Behind her, my ex-husband appeared, holding a wine glass, his expression heavy with guilt, but not courage. He said nothing, not a single word. That moment burned itself into my soul. The night I realized that sometimes the people who seem to have everything can be the coldest of all. I wrapped Liam tighter in my coat, started the engine, and drove away, my hands trembling. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller, its windows still glowing, its laughter still echoing. But for the first time in years, I didn't envy them, because no matter how warm that fireplace burned, their hearts were frozen, and mine, though shattered, still held the fire of a mother's love. The drive home that night felt endless. The snowstorm had thickened, wrapping the world in white silence, broken only by the rhythmic whir of the windshield wipers. Liam sat beside me, wrapped in my coat, staring out the window with hollow eyes. The streetlights flashed across his face, revealing the streaks of dried tears and the trembling of his small hands. I turned up the heater, glancing at him every few seconds, afraid he might slip away if I looked too long at the road. "You're safe now," I whispered, but he didn't answer. He was staring at his reflection in the window, his breath fogging up the glass. Something inside me cracked at that silence, the kind that only comes from a child who's learned not to speak, because speaking never helps. I tried again, softer this time. "Sweetheart, how long were you outside?" He shrugged, eyes still on the dark blur of snow. "A while." His voice was quiet, detached, the voice of someone too young to sound that way. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Did your dad know?" I asked, praying he'd say yes, that there had been some misunderstanding, that the man I once loved wasn't capable of this kind of cruelty. But Liam only shook his head. "He was busy," he murmured. "They were opening presents." My heart twisted. "And Sophie? Did she tell you to go outside?" He hesitated, then nodded, a small, frightened motion that said more than words ever could. I wanted to scream, to cry, to turn the car around and make her feel the cold she had forced upon him. But when I looked at my son's fragile frame beside me, I knew rage would have to wait. What he needed now wasn't anger, it was warmth, safety, and love. I reached out, brushing my hand through his hair. "You did nothing wrong, baby. Do you hear me? Nothing." For the first time, he turned toward me, his eyes glistening. "But she said—" He swallowed hard. "She said you didn't want me anymore." The car felt smaller suddenly, suffocating. My breath hitched. "What?" I whispered, though I'd heard him clearly. "She said you moved on, that you only cared about your work. That's why I have to stay with them." He bit his lip, trying not to cry. I could see his body tense, the instinct of a child who's been taught that tears are weakness. "I lied," I said firmly, my voice trembling. "I lied, Liam. I've never stopped wanting you, not for a single day." We stopped at a red light, and I turned to face him fully. His small hand was gripping that old toy car so tightly that his knuckles had gone white. "I used to say it was your lucky car." He nodded slowly. "Dad said I was too old for toys now." I forced a smile, though my throat burned. "Well, I still think it's lucky, because it brought you back to me tonight." For the first time, a faint smile flickered on his lips, weak but real. By the time we reached my apartment, it was close to midnight. I carried him inside, his head resting on my shoulder, his breath shallow but steady. The heater hummed softly as I tucked him under a thick blanket on the couch. He looked so small there, like the little boy who used to fall asleep on my chest after bedtime stories. I made him hot cocoa, extra marshmallows, the way he used to love. But when I handed him the mug, his hands were shaking too much to hold it. I guided it to his lips, and he took a slow sip, his eyes closing as warmth spread through him. "It's good," he whispered. I sat beside him, my hand resting on his. "Liam, tell me the truth," I said gently. "How long has she been like this? Has she hurt you before?" He hesitated. Eyes darted to the window, as if afraid someone might hear. "She doesn't like when I talk about you. She says you broke Dad's heart. She says I remind him of you." My chest felt heavy. Every word from him was another crack in the illusion I'd been clinging to, that he was happy, that he was safe. He leaned closer to me then, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes she locks my room when Dad's not home. She says it's to make me behave. But I didn't do anything, Mom. I promise." My heart stopped. For a long second, I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to blur, and the only thing I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat roaring in my ears. I wanted to scream, to storm into that house and tear down every wall that had trapped him in fear. But instead, I took a deep breath, forcing calm into my voice. "You don't have to go back there, okay?" I said, pulling him into my arms. "Not ever again." He nodded, but I could feel the doubt in his body, the way his small hands clung to me like he still expected someone to take him away. That night, I sat awake beside him as he slept, watching the snow fall through the window. Every now and then, he would flinch or mumble in his sleep, words like sorry and please. I wiped away the tears that slipped down his cheeks and whispered, "You're safe now." But deep down, I knew safety was just a word. What had been broken inside him couldn't be fixed overnight. Still, I made a silent promise to myself. No matter what it took, I would bring the truth to light. I would make sure he never had to shiver again, not from the cold outside, nor from the fear within. Morning crept in slowly, soft and pale through the frosted window panes. I hadn't slept at all. Every time Liam stirred, I jolted awake, terrified he might vanish like a dream I'd been afraid to end. The night before kept replaying in my head, the look in his eyes, the fear in his trembling voice, the hollow echo of laughter from that house. I sat on the edge of the couch, watching him breathe, counting each small rise and fall of his chest like it was a prayer. When he finally opened his eyes, the first thing he did was glance at the door. "You're safe," I said before he could ask. "You're home." He nodded weakly but didn't smile. It broke me that my own son didn't know what safety felt like anymore. I made breakfast, pancakes his favorite, though my hands shook too much to flip them properly. The smell of butter and syrup filled the room, something warm and familiar, something that used to mean joy. Liam sat at the table, still quiet, tracing patterns on the wood with his fingertip. I tried to sound cheerful. "Remember when you used to make snowmen taller than you? Maybe we can do that again today." He looked up briefly, his expression uncertain. "Sophie doesn't like snowmen," he said softly. "She says they make a mess." I froze for a second, spatula hovering midair. Even the simplest, purest joys of childhood, stolen. I set the plate in front of him and sat down. "Sweetheart," I began carefully. "I need to ask you something important. Do you remember if anyone at school saw you get dropped off yesterday?" He blinked, confused. "Dad picked me up early. Sophie said we were having a family Christmas dinner." He took a small bite of pancake, his voice trembling. "But she told me I couldn't open presents until I said I didn't miss you anymore." My stomach twisted. I could barely breathe. "And what did you say?" I asked quietly, though I already knew the answer. Tears welled up in his eyes. "I said I missed you," he whispered. "Then she told me to wait outside until I learned to be grateful." That was it. The breaking point. The fragile thread holding my restraint snapped clean. I stood up, gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles went white. "You did nothing wrong," I said again, forcing the words through my anger. "She's the one who's cruel." He nodded, but looked terrified, like he was scared of even agreeing with me. "Does Dad know?" I asked. He hesitated. "He says I should try to get along with her. He says she's trying her best." The lie burned like acid. I wanted to believe my ex-husband was just blind, not heartless. But a part of me knew silence was its own kind of cruelty. I walked into the next room, hands shaking as I grabbed my phone. My first instinct was to call the police, but then I thought about how fragile Liam was, how scared he was of causing trouble. Reporting abuse was never simple. I needed proof. I needed to be smart. My next call was to Sarah, my closest friend, a lawyer who had seen too many cases like mine end badly because mothers acted on emotion instead of evidence. When she answered, my voice broke before I could even explain. "Sarah, he was outside, in the snow, all night." There was a long silence on the line before she spoke. "Anik, listen to me. You can't confront them yet. Get him checked by a doctor first. You'll need medical documentation. If there's proof of neglect, the court will reopen custody." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Okay, I'll take him today." I ended the call and looked over at Liam. He was sitting there, quietly, trying to fold his napkin into shapes. That small, innocent act made my heart ache. "We're going out," I told him. "Just a little trip." He looked wary. "To Dad's?" "No, sweetheart," I said quickly. "Just to see a nice doctor, to make sure you're okay." At the clinic, the doctor, a kind woman named Dr. Patel, examined him gently. She frowned when she saw the redness on his hands, the slight frostbite on his fingers. "He's lucky," she said softly. "A little longer out there, and he could have had permanent damage." I felt the blood drain from my face. She documented everything carefully, the bruises on his wrist, the faint marks that looked like nail scratches. When she asked what happened, Liam hesitated and glanced at me. I nodded for him to speak. "I was bad, so she said I had to learn a lesson." The doctor's eyes softened with pity. "That's not discipline. That's abuse." Her words hit like a verdict. I felt anger boil in my chest. Not the wild kind, but the cold, focused kind that changes everything. "Can you put this in a report?" I asked. She nodded. "I'll make sure it's detailed. You should also consider contacting Child Protective Services." I thanked her, but deep inside, I knew what that meant. Confrontation, lawyers, hearings, more pain for Liam. Still, if that was the price of saving him, I would pay it tenfold. As we left the clinic, snowflakes drifted gently through the air again, the kind that would have once made him giggle and reach out his tongue to catch them. But now, he just watched them fall, silent, distant. I knelt beside him, brushing a stray flake from his hair. "We'll fix this," I promised, "no matter how long it takes." He looked up at me with those tired, trusting eyes, and whispered, "Do you think Santa forgot me this year?" My throat tightened. I smiled through the pain and pulled him close. "No, baby. Santa never forgets the good ones. Maybe he was just waiting until you came home." That night, after he fell asleep in his room, my room now, our room, I sat by the window holding the doctor's report in my hands. Outside, the snow glowed under the streetlight, beautiful and cruel at once. I knew this was only the beginning. Tomorrow, I would go back to that house, not as a broken ex-wife, but as a mother ready to fight for her child's life. The next morning, the air outside felt sharper than usual, like even the wind knew what was about to happen. I woke up before the sun, my mind restless, replaying every moment from the night before. Liam's trembling voice, the bruises, the doctor's report now sitting in my purse like a loaded weapon. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection as I tied my hair back. There was exhaustion in my eyes, but also something stronger: resolve. For years, I had swallowed my pain in silence, convincing myself that keeping the peace was better for Liam. But that silence had nearly cost me my son. Today, I wasn't going to be quiet. Today, I was going to make them see what they'd done. Liam was still asleep, curled beneath the blanket I tucked around him. For a moment, I considered letting him sleep through what was coming, but I knew the truth couldn't wait. He needed to know that his mother wasn't afraid anymore. I brushed his hair gently, whispering, "I'll be back soon, sweetheart. You stay with Aunt Sarah until I call, okay?" He mumbled softly, still half asleep, and nodded. I left a note by his bedside before sleeping out the door. The streets were still empty, covered in a thin layer of frost. My breath fogged up in the cold as I gripped the steering wheel and headed back toward that red brick house that had haunted my dreams. When I pulled into the driveway, everything looked picture perfect again. The snow shoveled neatly, the curtains drawn, a wreath hanging on the front door like nothing had ever happened. I could hear faint music inside, a Christmas song, playing softly, almost mockingly. For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to turn back, to avoid the inevitable explosion that would follow. But then I remembered Liam's words. She said I had to learn a lesson. That was all it took. I walked up to the door and rang the bell. The door opened after a moment, and there she was, Sophie. Her perfectly curled blonde hair framed a face that looked sweet from afar, but sharp up close. Her expression froze when she saw me. "Oh," she said, her smile tight, "I didn't expect to see you again so soon." I forced a calm tone. "We need to talk." She raised an eyebrow, leaning against the doorway. "If this is about Liam, you really should speak to his father." I planned to, but you'll want to hear this too. Before she could reply, I stepped past her and into the house. The warmth hit me immediately, the kind of cozy heat that should have felt comforting, but instead felt suffocating, like a lie. The same fireplace still crackled cheerfully, the same scent of cinnamon and pine lingering in the air. My ex-husband Daniel appeared from the hallway, his face registering shock and discomfort. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low. "We talked about this." "No, you talked. I listened, but not anymore." Sophie crossed her arms. "You're trespassing." I turned toward her slowly, my voice trembling with controlled fury. "And you're abusing a child." The color drained from her face. "Excuse me?" she snapped. "I don't know what lies you've been feeding." I pulled the folded paper from my bag and slammed it on the coffee table. "This," I said, "is a medical report. It confirms frostbite, bruising, and neglect. Do you want to deny that too?" Daniel's face paled as he looked at the paper. "What is this?" he whispered. "Proof. Proof of what happens when you're too busy pretending everything is perfect to notice your own son freezing outside your house." He ran a hand through his hair, eyes darting toward Sophie.
Tell me she's lying to her, his voice barely steady. Sophie straightened her shoulders, her mask of calm cracking slightly. He wanted to play outside. I told him not to. He didn't listen. For hours, in the middle of a snowstorm? I snapped. Her composure faltered. You don't understand, she hissed. That boy, he doesn't respect boundaries. He talks back. He's a child, I shouted, my voice echoing through the living room. He's your stepson. You married his father, not just his freedom. Daniel stepped between us, but for the first time, I saw guilt in his eyes. Deep, raw, suffocating guilt. Sophie, tell me you didn't make him stay outside. She looked at him, eyes wide and defensive. You always take her side. He needed to learn discipline. You said yourself he's too soft because of her. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind of silence that exposes everything words try to hide. Daniel sank onto the couch, his hands shaking. God, what have we done? He whispered. I looked at him, tears stinging my eyes. You didn't just hurt him, Daniel. You broke him. Sophie's voice rose, shrill and desperate. You don't get to come here and play the hero. You left him when you left us. No, I said firmly, stepping closer. You stole him from me. You filled his head with poison and locked him out in the cold. Don't you dare twist that into love. At that moment, a small sound came from the hallway, the soft creak of a floorboard. We all turned, and there, standing half hidden in the shadows, was Liam. My heart stopped. Sweetheart? I whispered. He must have followed me, too scared to let me face them alone. His small frame looked even smaller in that wide, gleaming hallway. Sophie froze, her face going pale. Daniel looked between us, shame flooding his expression. Liam's voice was soft but steady. He said Santa didn't come because I was bad. His eyes were on Sophie. The room fell silent. Sophie opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Daniel's face hardened. For the first time, I saw anger. Not at me, but at her. Get out, he quietly said. What? She gasped. Daniel, you can't. I said get out. He slammed his hand on the table. The mug on the counter shattered, the sound sharp and final. Sophie stumbled backward, her perfect facade crumbling at last. Liam ran into my arms, burying his face in my coat. I held him tight, my eyes meeting Daniel's. For a moment the air was still. Then I said quietly, This isn't over. Not until he's safe. Daniel nodded slowly, his voice breaking. Do whatever you have to do. As we left that house, I looked back one last time. The fire still burned in the hearth, but the laughter was gone. The warmth that once mocked me now looked hollow, like a lie finally stripped bare. By the next morning, the events of the confrontation felt like a dream I hadn't quite woken up from, except the bruise on my heart told me it had been very real. Sophie was gone. I'd seen her storm off down the driveway, screaming into her phone as snow swirled around her. But the storm she left behind was far from over. I knew that what came next wouldn't be about emotion. It would be about proof, about the law, about whether I could protect my son from a system that often looked away until it was too late. I sat at the kitchen table, the doctor's report spread out in front of me, along with the old custody papers that had once felt like a life sentence. Liam was upstairs, still asleep, finally sleeping soundly for once, and I didn't want to wake him. When Sarah arrived, she didn't knock. She came in quietly, her expression grim but focused. You did the right thing bringing him home, she said as she sat down, but this is going to be messy. I nodded. I don't care. I just want him safe. She unfolded her briefcase and began laying out documents. We'll file an emergency motion for temporary custody. The medical report gives us grounds, but Daniel's cooperation will make or break this. I hesitated. He told her to leave. He said I could do whatever I had to, then get him to put that in writing, she said. Judges don't care about guilt. They care about evidence. It was strange, hearing my pain reduced to legal language, to evidence and grounds. But I understood. Emotion got you sympathy. Proof got you custody. I took a deep breath and nodded. What about Liam? I asked softly. Will he have to talk? Sarah sighed. Probably. A child advocate will interview him. Don't coach him, just make him feel safe enough to tell the truth. My chest tightened. The idea of my son having to relive those moments made me sick. But if that's what it took, I'd hold his hand through every word. Later that afternoon, Daniel called. His voice was hoarse, strained, the sound of a man who'd finally seen the damage he'd been blind to. I talked to a lawyer, he said quietly. She's saying I could lose everything if he pressed charges. You already did, I said flatly. There was silence on the line. Then, softer, he said, I didn't know she'd gone that far. I thought she just needed time to adjust. I almost laughed, bitterly. Adjust? You mean to motherhood? You don't get to adjust by breaking a child. He sighed. You're right. His voice cracked. I'll sign whatever you need. I can't undo what happened, but I'll testify that it wasn't your fault. It was the first real act of courage I'd seen from him in years. Maybe guilt had finally burned through his fear. Thank you, I said quietly. Just tell the truth. That night, after Liam went to bed, I sat by the window again, watching the snow fall under the dim streetlight. Each flake that hit the glass melted instantly, gone before it even left a mark. It reminded me of all the times I'd melted away from my own son's life, by court orders, by fear, by compromise. Not this time. This time, I would be the storm that didn't fade. I opened my laptop and began writing down every detail Liam had told me. Times, dates, words, even the way he described the look on Sophie's face when she'd locked the door. It hurt to relive, but it was necessary. Every truth deserved to be written, especially the ones that had been silenced. Over the next few days, things moved fast. Sarah filed the emergency motion. A social worker came to visit, gentle but observant. She asked Liam questions about his school, about home, about Sophie. He hesitated at first, glancing at me every few seconds as if to ask if it was okay to speak. I smiled at him, nodding softly. It's okay, baby, I whispered. And then the dam broke. He told them everything. About the punishments, about being told he was unwanted, about Christmas Eve. The social worker's pen stopped halfway through her notes. She looked at me, eyes full of quiet fury. You're doing the right thing, she said. Within a week, the judge granted me temporary custody pending a full investigation. I should have felt relief, and in a way I did, but it was bittersweet, because I knew what that meant. Hearings, lawyers, and the painful retelling of every moment that broke us. Daniel had agreed to testify, but Sophie was already fighting back. Her attorney filed a counterclaim, accusing me of manipulation, of alienating the child from his stable home. The irony was sickening. She had built her stability on a foundation of cruelty, and now she wanted to call it love? The media caught wind of it too. Not the public kind, but whispers among the local community. The perfect family isn't so perfect after all. I ignored it. I didn't care about reputations anymore. I cared about the little boy who still woke up crying some nights, whispering apologies for things he hadn't done. I cared about rebuilding his sense of safety, one heartbeat at a time. On the night before the first court hearing, Liam crawled into my bed, clutching his toy car. Mom, he whispered, if the judge asks me where I want to live, can I say with you? I felt my throat close. Of course you can, sweetheart. You can always tell the truth. He looked up at me with those wide, tired eyes. even if they don't believe me?" I smiled through the tears. "Then we'll say it again and again until they do." He nodded, resting his head against my arm. As I held him, I realized that winning this case wasn't just about custody papers. It was about restoring something much deeper, his trust in the world, in love, in me. The snow fell quietly outside, covering the scars of the street below. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. Not because the fight was over, but because for the first time, I was fighting the right way.
The courthouse smelled faintly of coffee and cold marble. Its tall ceilings and echoing halls made everyone's footsteps sound louder than they should have, like guilt carried in sound. I held Liam's hand tightly as we walked through the corridor, his small fingers trembling inside mine. He wore the blue sweater his grandmother had knitted before she passed, a comfort piece, his armor, he'd called it that morning. My heart broke a little when he said it, because no child should need armor to tell the truth. Sarah walked beside us, her expression calm but razor sharp, like a soldier before battle. "Stay composed," she murmured quietly. "Family court judges don't react to tears, they react to truth. Let the evidence speak." As we entered the courtroom, I saw Daniel already seated at the witness bench, looking older than I remembered. Sophie sat across the aisle, her lawyer whispering something in her ear. She looked immaculate. Hair perfectly curled, face calm, expression carefully painted with innocence. When her eyes met mine, she gave a faint, pitying smile. It wasn't guilt. It was confidence. The confidence of someone who thought she could still twist the story her way. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with silver hair tied neatly behind her head, entered the room and called the case to order. Custody hearing, Reed versus Reed. The words sliced through the air like a knife. I glanced at Liam. He looked down at his shoes, clutching his toy car in his pocket. Sarah started strong. She presented the doctor's report first, detailing Liam's hypothermia, the bruises on his arm, the psychological symptoms consistent with emotional neglect. Then came the social worker's statement, recounting Liam's testimony. Each piece of paper, each signature, each line of ink felt like another heartbeat toward justice. Sophie's lawyer objected multiple times, calling it biased interpretation, but the judge's expression didn't change. She was listening, not just to words, but to the spaces between them. When Daniel took the stand, I held my breath. This was the moment that could change everything. He looked nervous, his hands shaking slightly as he was sworn in. "Mr. Reed," Sarah began, "can you tell the court what you observed on the night of December 24th? He hesitated, eyes flicking toward Sophie. For a second, I feared he'd fold. But then he sighed, shoulders slumping. "I came downstairs around 9. I couldn't find Liam. Sophie said he'd gone to bed early, but I didn't believe her. I looked outside and saw the porch light on. He was sitting there, shivering. I brought him inside, but Sophie said I was overreacting." His voice cracked. "I didn't do enough to stop her. I should have." A quiet murmur swept the courtroom. Sophie's lawyer shot up instantly. "Your Honor, this testimony is biased and emotionally charged." "Overruled," the judge said sharply. "Let him continue." Daniel swallowed hard, looking straight at me. When his mother showed up that night, I didn't stop her. I knew she was right. I just didn't have the courage to admit it. His words trembled, but they rang with the kind of honesty that can't be rehearsed. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I didn't look away. For the first time, Daniel wasn't my enemy. He was a witness to the truth. When it was Sophie's turn to testify, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Her lawyer's voice was smooth, rehearsed. "Mrs. Reed, can you explain your side of the events on December 24th? Sophie clasped her hands delicately, playing the role perfectly. "Yes, Liam has always had a sensitive temperament. He'd thrown a tantrum that evening, refused to eat, said he wanted his old home. I told him he could go outside for a few minutes to calm down, but I was watching him through the window. He wasn't in danger." It was a flawless lie, delivered with calm confidence. If I hadn't known her, even I might have believed it. Sarah rose to cross-examine.
You say you watched him through the window. Then why did his temperature drop below normal when he was admitted to the hospital 2 hours later? Sophie blinked. He wasn't outside that long. According to your neighbor's security camera, he was, Sarah said, sliding a printed still photo across the table. The timestamp glowed clearly on the image. 8:47 p.m. Liam, sitting in the snow, hugging his knees. The courtroom went silent. Sophie's face went pale. That's not accurate, Sarah said calmly. It's timestamped, Mrs. Reed, and it's been verified. The rest of her defense unraveled quickly after that. The psychologist's report showed signs of fear responses in Liam consistent with prolonged emotional stress. Witness statements from school staff confirmed that he often arrived quiet, withdrawn, and underdressed for winter days. Every truth that had been buried under Sophie's charm was dragged into the light, one fact at a time. By the time the judge announced a recess, Sophie's mask had cracked. She sat rigid, her jaw tight, eyes glassy with anger. As we stepped out into the hallway, Sarah whispered, "We've got this. Just stay steady." I nodded, my body trembling with exhaustion. Liam tugged my sleeve and looked up at me. "Is it almost over, Mom?" he asked softly. I knelt and kissed his forehead. "Almost, baby. Just a little longer." As I held him, I realized something profound. This wasn't just a courtroom battle. It was the closing of a wound that had been bleeding for years. The truth had finally begun to speak. And once truth starts speaking, it doesn't stop. The next morning, the courthouse felt different. The tension in the air was heavier but quieter, the kind that comes when everyone knows the end is near. Snow still clung to the courthouse steps outside, glistening under a pale winter sun, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I sat in the waiting area with Liam beside me, his head resting on my shoulder. He hadn't said much since yesterday's hearing. The emotional toll had drained him, and me. But somewhere behind those tired eyes I could see it, a flicker of hope, fragile but alive. When the bailiff called our case, we entered the courtroom one last time. Sophie was already there, her lawyer whispering something sharp and fast in her ear. She didn't look at me, not once. Her composure was fractured, her eyes rimmed red from a night of anger or panic, I couldn't tell. Daniel sat near the back, his hands clasped, his expression empty, maybe shame, maybe relief. The judge entered and everyone rose. My knees felt weak, but I stood tall, clutching Liam's little hand like it was the anchor keeping me from drowning. After reviewing the testimonies, evidence, and reports, the judge began, her voice steady and low. The court finds significant cause for concern regarding the welfare of the child, Liam Reed. Sophie's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. The judge continued, her eyes scanning the papers before her. It is the opinion of this court that the actions taken by Mrs. Sophie Reed on the night of December 24th constituted neglect. Furthermore, evidence suggests a consistent pattern of emotional manipulation and psychological harm. She paused, looking directly at Sophie. You will be required to undergo mandatory therapy and parenting evaluation before any further custodial consideration. I felt my breath catch. The judge turned her gaze toward me. Effective immediately, primary custody is awarded to the child's biological mother, Mrs. Claire Reed. Visitation rights for the father will be revisited following compliance with mandated counseling. For a second, the words didn't register. They hung in the air, distant and unbelievable. And then, Liam squeezed my hand and whispered, "We won, Mom." My throat closed. "We did, sweetheart. We did." The courtroom murmured quietly, but all I could hear was the pounding of my heart. I looked at Sophie, who sat frozen, her lawyer whispering frantically beside her. Then slowly, her mask cracked completely. Her face twisted, not in sadness, but in rage, the kind that comes from losing control. "This isn't over," she spat suddenly, standing up. "You think you can take him from me? You have no idea what I've done for this family." The judge banged her gavel sharply. "Mrs. Reed, you are out of order." But Sophie wasn't listening. Her words spilled out like venom. You think she's perfect? She's not. She left him. She gave up on both of them. The courtroom fell silent. Every eye turned to me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. That's enough, Daniel said quietly, standing. His voice was calm, almost sorrowful. You're right, Sophie. She did make mistakes, but she never hurt him. You did. His words landed like a gavel of their own. Sophie's shoulders slumped. She looked around wildly, but the room had already turned cold. Her power, that quiet manipulative hold she had over everyone, was gone. As court security escorted her out, something strange happened. A woman I didn't recognize, sitting in the back row, stood up and followed her with quiet urgency. Later, I learned she was a social worker from another county, one who'd received past complaints about Sophie. Apparently, there had been incidents before, reports closed due to insufficient evidence. My blood ran cold. How many children had suffered under her polished smile before someone finally believed them? Outside the courthouse, the winter air felt sharper, but lighter somehow. The weight that had sat on my chest for years began to ease. Daniel approached me slowly, his breath visible in the cold. Claire, he said softly, I'm sorry. For everything. I looked at him for a long time. You should be, I said quietly, but thank you for telling the truth. He nodded, tears gathering in his eyes. He's a good kid. You did that. When Liam and I stepped out into the sunlight, the snow beneath our feet crunched like new beginnings. He looked up at the sky and smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. Can we go home now? He asked. I bent down, brushing a bit of snow from his hair. We already are, baby. We already are. That night, as we sat by our own small fireplace, wrapped in blankets and warmth, I watched him drift to sleep with his toy car clutched in his hand. The flames flickered gently, casting soft shadows on the walls. Not the cold, hollow light of that other house, but a real living warmth. I thought of everything we'd survived, the lies, the courts, the loneliness, and realized something profound. Love isn't proven by comfort, but by endurance. Christmas was over, but for us it had just begun. Not the kind with gifts or lights, but the kind where healing starts quietly, like embers under ash. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, let myself rest. My son was safe, my heart was whole, and in the soft crackle of the fire, I could almost hear the sound of forgiveness. Not just for Daniel, not even for Sophie, but for myself.
The days that followed felt like stepping out of a storm into the quiet of morning. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but peaceful. For the first time in years, the house wasn't filled with tension or echoes of court documents being shuffled, lawyers calling, or arguments lingering like ghosts. Instead, it smelled like cinnamon and cocoa again. Liam's laughter, light, hesitant at first, but growing stronger, became the new sound of home. Every morning, I'd find him by the window, watching the snowfall, his breath fogging the glass as he traced tiny hearts or cars with his finger. It looks softer now, he said once, looking up at me. The snow, it doesn't feel scary anymore. I smiled, though my eyes burned with tears. That's because it's not cold inside us anymore, I whispered. Healing wasn't instant. It came in waves, some gentle, some sharp. Liam had nightmares for weeks. Sometimes I'd hear him cry out, "Please, I'll be good," and I'd run to his room, hold him close, whispering that he didn't need to be good for love, that love was his already. Other times, he'd ask questions that broke me in ways I didn't know I could still break. Mom, why did she not like me? I never had an easy answer. I told him the truth in small pieces, that sometimes hurt people try to hurt others, that it wasn't his fault, and that his heart was stronger than her cruelty. He would nod quietly, then hug me tight, as if testing whether my love was still there. Every time it was. We started new traditions, small, simple, ours. On Fridays, we'd make pancakes for dinner and dance to old Christmas songs no matter the season. On Sundays, we visit the park with the frozen pond, feeding ducks even in the chill. And every night, before bed, he'd choose a book and we'd read until he fell asleep on my shoulder. There were still shadows, but they no longer controlled us. They were just reminders of how far we'd come. One evening, about a month after the verdict, Daniel visited. He stood awkwardly at the door, holding a small wrapped box. He said, "It's for him." I hesitated, but stepped aside. Liam looked up from his drawing when he saw his father. For a moment, the room went still. And then Liam smiled. A small, cautious smile, but real. "Hi, Dad." Daniel's eyes welled up. "Hey, buddy." He handed him the gift, a model airplane kit. Liam's face lit up. "Can we build it together?" he asked, and I saw Daniel's throat tighten. "Yeah," he whispered. "I'd like that." I watched them from the kitchen as they worked on it. Father and son gluing wings and laughing over crooked edges. I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acceptance. Daniel was trying. Maybe guilt led him here, or love, or both. But he was present. That mattered. When he left later that night, he stood by the doorway for a moment. "You're doing a good job, Claire. He's smiling again because of you." I nodded, my voice too soft to speak. When the door closed, I looked around the room. The warmth, the light, the small airplane drying on the table, and realized this was the life I'd been fighting for all along. Weeks turned into months, and the world outside began to thaw. Winter melted into spring, and with it, the remnants of our pain. Liam started therapy, and little by little, he opened up more. Not just about the fear, but about dreams, about wanting to play soccer, about building the happiest house in the world when he grew up. His therapist said he was healing beautifully. I wanted to believe her, and maybe, for the first time, I truly did. On the first warm day of April, we went back to the same hill where, a year ago, we had watched the Christmas lights from afar. The snow had melted and wildflowers were beginning to bloom. Liam ran ahead, arms spread wide, laughing so freely that it echoed through the quiet air. I sat on the grass, closing my eyes, feeling the sun on my face. For so long I had chased warmth through other people, through old memories, through forgiveness I hadn't given myself. But sitting there, watching my son, alive, happy, whole, I realized warmth was something we built, not something we found. That night, before bed, Liam placed the finished model airplane on his shelf. He said, "Mom, can we have Christmas again this year? But like our kind of Christmas." I smiled, brushing his hair back. I said, "Every day we're together is our kind of Christmas." He grinned sleepily, hugging his blanket. "Then I guess we'll have a lot of them." I kissed his forehead, whispering, "Yes, baby, a whole lifetime." When the lights went out, I sat by the window, looking at the quiet street below. The world was the same. Same snow, same stars. But we weren't. We had survived something colder than winter and came out warmer than ever. Maybe that's what healing really was. Not erasing the pain, but learning to live with it, to grow around it, until even the scars start to glow. A year later, Christmas arrived quietly, without the chaos, without the ache, without the emptiness that used to haunt me when the lights went up around the neighborhood. It was peaceful this time, almost sacred. The tree in our living room wasn't big, just a small pine that Liam and I had decorated together with mismatched ornaments and homemade stars cut from colored paper. It looked imperfect, but real, a reflection of us. Outside, the snow fell gently, turning the world into a soft white hush. I stood by the window, a cup of cocoa warming my hands, and watched Liam run around the yard with their new puppy, trying to catch snowflakes on his tongue. His laughter echoed in the cold air like a melody I'd waited my whole life to hear again. So much had changed since that night a year ago, the night I found him shivering on the porch, forgotten by those who claimed to love him. We had both carried scars from that winter, but over time,
The pain had become part of our story, not the end of it. The court case was long behind us now. Sophie had moved out of state for a fresh start, though the last I heard, she was under supervision for mandatory counseling. Daniel had kept his promise: therapy, consistency, and effort. He visited every other weekend, no longer the man torn between guilt and pride, but a father who finally understood what it meant to stay. I didn't love him anymore, but I didn't hate him either. Maybe that was its own kind of peace. On Christmas Eve, as I tucked Liam into bed, he whispered, "This is the best Christmas ever." I smiled. "Why is that, sweetheart?" He shrugged, grinning. "Because it's warm. Even outside feels warm." He hugged me tight before drifting off to sleep, his little toy car still on the nightstand like a reminder of where we'd started. I stayed by his bed for a while, just watching him breathe, memorizing the calm on his face. Then when the house was still, I went downstairs to clean up the wrapping paper we'd left scattered across the floor. That's when I saw it. An envelope, slipped through the mail slot, its edges damp from snow. My name was written on it in careful cursive. No stamp, no address, just Claire. For a moment I hesitated, my pulse quickening. I set down my mug and opened it. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, no return name, but as soon as I saw the handwriting, my heart clenched. It was from Sophie. "Claire, I know I don't have the right to ask anything of you, but I need you to know that I've been in therapy for months now. They say healing starts with facing the truth, and mine is ugly. I didn't hate Liam. I hated myself for not being able to give him what he needed, for failing at being the woman I pretended to be. I thought control was love. I thought silence meant peace. But I was wrong. I see that now. He didn't deserve what I did. Neither did you. You fought for him when I broke him, and maybe that's why he'll grow up kind instead of cold. So thank you for saving him from me. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope one day, when he's old enough to understand, you'll tell him that I'm sorry, not to erase what happened, but so he knows I finally learned what love really means. Sincerely, Sophie." The letter trembled in my hands as I finished reading. For a long time, I just stood there, the quiet hum of the heater and the whisper of falling snow filling the room. I should have felt anger, maybe satisfaction, but what I felt instead was something heavier yet gentler. Closure. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a release. For the first time, Sophie's words didn't feel like manipulation. They felt human, broken, honest, remorseful. I stepped outside into the cold night, holding the letter loosely in my hand. The snowflakes melted on my skin, soft and fleeting. The world was quiet, the kind of silence that holds truth instead of pain. I looked up at the window where Liam slept and whispered, "You're free now, baby. We both are." Then, without overthinking it, I knelt in the snow and buried the letter beneath the old maple tree, the same spot where Liam had once built his first snowman. The ground was cold, but my heart wasn't. When I went back inside, I lit a single candle on the table and sat beside it, letting its flicker dance across the room. It reminded me of that first Christmas after I left Daniel, when I sat alone, wondering if love had an expiration date. Now I knew it didn't. Real love doesn't vanish, it evolves. It learns, it rebuilds, it survives even the coldest winters. Upstairs, Liam stirred in his sleep, mumbling something about snowflakes and stars. I smiled and whispered to myself, "Merry Christmas," not just to him, but to the woman I used to be, the one who drove through the snow that night with shaking hands, following nothing but her heart. She had no idea where that road would lead, but she drove it anyway. And that courage, I realize now, was what saved us both. Outside, the wind carried the soft scent of pine and frost. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang, and for the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next.
Years passed, as quietly and swiftly as snow melting under the first light of spring. The house that once echoed with loneliness was now filled with laughter, footsteps, and warmth. Liam was no longer the trembling little boy I'd carried out of the cold that night. He was 16 now, tall and kind-eyed, with the quiet strength that reminded me of the child who once whispered, "It's okay, Mom," when he should have been the one comforted. He had his father's smile, but my heart, steady and stubborn. Every Christmas, he still hung that same paper star, the one we'd made together during our first Christmas alone. It was crumpled and faded now, but he said it was lucky. That Christmas morning, I woke up to the smell of cinnamon rolls and laughter in the kitchen. Liam was standing by the stove, flour on his cheek, pretending to be the head chef. "Breakfast in bed is overrated," he joked. "You need to see the chaos behind the magic." He handed me a mug of cocoa, extra marshmallows, just how I liked it, and said, "We're doing things differently this year." He let me outside where the yard was covered in untouched snow. The maple tree stood tall, its roots still guarding the letter I'd buried years ago. But now there was something new beneath it. A small wooden bench, carved by hand. "I built it in shop class," he said shyly. "Thought it could be our spot." I ran my hand along the smooth edge, tracing the words etched on the backrest, "Where love found its warmth again." My throat tightened, the world blurring for a second. "You remembered," I whispered. "Of course," he said softly. "That night, Mom, the one you found me outside, I used to think about it a lot. I wondered why you came, why you didn't just leave me there like everyone else did before. But now I get it. You didn't save me because you had to. You saved me because you couldn't not." His voice cracked slightly, but he smiled through it, that same brave little boy still somewhere inside. "I think about her too sometimes. Sophie," he added quietly. "Dad told me what happened, and I don't hate her anymore. I used to, but I think she was lost, like I was. Maybe she found her way eventually." I nodded slowly, my heart swelling with something that wasn't just pride, it was awe. He'd grown into a man capable of empathy, of forgiveness, of light, the kind of person I once prayed he'd become. We sat together on the bench, the morning sun glinting off the snow, turning the world golden. It was quiet, peaceful, timeless. Then he pulled something out of his coat pocket, a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. My breath caught. "Where did you—" "It was under the roots," he said. "I found it last summer when I was mowing the lawn. I didn't read it then. I waited." He handed it to me gently, and together we unfolded it. The ink had faded, but Sophie's words were still there, trembling across the page. He read them silently, his eyes scanning every line. When he finished, he didn't speak for a long time. Then finally, he said, "I think she really meant it, Mom." "I do too," I said softly. He folded the letter back up and placed it in my hand. "Keep it. You carried me through the storm. Maybe it's time I carry this." Before I could respond, he stood and brushed the snow off his jeans. "Come on, we've got a Christmas dinner to burn." His grin was wide and bright, the kind that could melt the coldest day. I laughed and followed him inside. The fire crackled in the hearth, and for the first time I noticed how its warmth reached every corner of the room. As we set the table together, I looked around, at the tree glowing with soft lights, at the photos on the wall capturing years of laughter and growth, and my son humming himself softly, and I realized something profound. Love doesn't just heal, it transforms. It turns pain into purpose, silence into song, and loneliness into legacy. Later that evening after dinner, Liam went outside again, standing beneath the same stars that had watched over us all those years ago. I watched from the doorway as he closed his eyes, his breath misting in the cold air. I didn't need to ask what he was thinking. I already knew.
He was remembering that little boy, the one who sat shivering outside while others laughed by the fireplace. The boy who thought Christmas was for everyone but him. And maybe, just maybe, he was thanking the universe for giving him another chance, for giving us another chance. When he came back inside, he smiled at me and said, "You know, Mom, I think I finally understand why Christmas matters. It's not about the gifts or the lights. It's about finding warmth, even when no one else offers it." I nodded, my eyes glistening. "You're right, sweetheart. It's about finding warmth and never letting it go." The fire crackled louder, wrapping the house in a golden glow. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, endless, forgiving. Inside, our hearts stayed warm.